so I guess we'll talk to
Works for me.
Story of my life.
people.
Everything's Douglas's fault.
Aw,
Story of my
no. I
life.
couldn't live without that one.
Listen,
Office, doesn't matter.
yeah. Just name a
Very proud of
place.
his ice machine work. All right, you guys are live.
We're live. Okay. You ready, Desiree?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and call to order the Thursday, February 1st meeting of the Administration Committee and acknowledge that the press and the public have been duly notified of our meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. That's item 1. Item 2, citizens' comments. Item 3, old business. So do we have we want to do our minutes somewhere? We're not,
Are they not in the
There's
packet?
Well,
some
they're-
minutes
the
attached,
minutes are
but
there,
there's
but they're
nothing on the
not, yeah.
agenda, so. But
Oh,
we
okay,
can do
well,
it next time.
yeah, we can
Yeah,
add
we'll
them
just
next
do-
time.
Yeah.
That's weird.
I missed that. So, okay, old business, item 3, a review of applicants for the Accommodations Tax Advisory Committee vacancy. Desiree, do you have an update or?
Yes, absolutely. So we issued an announcement on our website and shared it on our social and sent it to some of the local newspapers that were accepting and seeking new applications from folks to serve on this upcoming vacancy in the Accommodation Tax Advisory Committee. We also reached out to everybody that has applied since back to 2016 to see whether they were still interested, letting them know we have their application on file and whether or not they were interested. Of that outreach, we received 2 new applications from one, Mr. Rod Turnage. He was interviewed early last year when we had a number of vacancies in the committee. So he's already been interviewed. And then we also received an application from Ms. Margaret Miller. She used to serve on the Accommodation Tax Advisory Board for many years before she resigned a couple of years ago. So she's local, retired, comes from the banking world. And I believe she used, and I have not yet been able to confirm this, but I believe she served at an at-large seat, which is the seat we're trying to fill. When the city interviewed Mr. Turnage last year, I believe he was eligible for the lodging seat just because of his experience and insight in the rental community and real estate and all that. So he would, he would be, I think, would be great for that particular seat. But those are the only 2 applications that we received, and the only responses we received from people who may still be interested in being considered for that vacancy.
Got it. Yeah, I'd like to keep the at-large seat as at-large as possible, hoping to get somebody from a background that's not tourism-driven exactly. The perspective, I think, would be valuable.
And we originally had the deadline for new applications be last Friday. We extended it through yesterday, so that was a quick turnaround to get those people lined up to come to an interview. So I think that's part of the reason we don't have anybody here. We'd like to hear your feedback on whether you want to interview both of these 2 candidates, whether you want us to, we can reach out again to, there's one applicant from last year that has not expressed whether or not she's still interested, but we can reach out again, or just interview Ms. Miller, which I think would be eligible for the at-large seat. We could also extend the application, just keep it open. Mm-hmm. The reality is we've done this before. There's not a whole lot of interest for these applications.
For these exciting appointments, nobody's.
I think it's exciting. So I don't, we can keep it open until filled, but I don't think we'll have any different reaction or response.
I don't know Ms. Miller, but it's interesting that somebody would have some perspective. They wouldn't be coming in cold. I don't know what the makeup of the most recent appointments were, if they had any background or any thoughts on continuing to leave it open, or?
Can we also interview Mr. Turnage as well? So we can just.
Sure.
I would be fine just to interview those 2.
Mm-hmm.
And if we wanted to reach out to Ms. Nelms again, just to offer it, I would encourage that. But otherwise, I would be fine to.
Yeah.
I don't see why we would leave it open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've reached out
Based on
to
what you said.
Ms. Nelms, but she's not responded?
Yeah, we reached out to everybody that has applied, and the only 2 that responded was Mr. Turnage and Margaret Miller.
Okay. Well, one more try.
And then we can line up the two applicants for your next meeting for an interview.
Sure.
What was your deadline? You mentioned some deadline that they.
The 30th of January.
No, I thought you had mentioned last time that the ATAX committee was meeting on something and going to.
Their next meeting is March 12th.
Yeah.
That's according to the schedule that they approved last year. I'm not sure if we'll have to make any changes to ensure quorum, but their next meeting is scheduled for the 12th. And at that meeting, they are hearing from organizations that are requesting funding from the city's ATAX fund. And ideally, we would want to have a full committee. They are not making any decisions at that meeting. So whoever is assigned to that vacancy, if the appointment happens after this meeting, can go back and watch the presentations.
But if we have a meeting in early March, we can make, but it would still have to go to council.
Yes, sir.
So it wouldn't be until the end of March before that would
Correct.
be finalized, yeah.
The other option for the committee to consider is having a special meeting in the next week or so for that interview and make a recommendation, and then council could hear that recommendation from the committee at the February 23rd meeting.
I don't think it's that critical that we have a special meeting. I think
Okay.
it's fine. They can go one short for the March meeting.
Yeah,
And that's a good sized committee.
Yeah.
It's not like BOSA,
yeah.
every little seat counts. So the
All right.
plan is we will reach out again to Ms. Nelms. We'll contact Mr. Turnage and Ms. Miller
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully get them in here for our March meeting.
Okay.
That sounds
for an
good.
interview. Okay. So thank you for that work, Desiree.
You're welcome.
So moving on to new business. Discussion of City Code Section 1-3-13, which regulates public participation during council meetings. Any background you want to share, or?
I'm trying to pull up my agenda in
Oh.
my packet, but this is on parking? I'm sorry.
No, this is the public participation.
Public participation, yes. So the city made some changes to the public participation section of our code in 2019. And before then, I recall the section governing public participation was short, really didn't have a whole lot of guidance. It did request people to sign up at the beginning of the meeting, state their name and address, but at the time, council felt like they wanted to have a more detailed guidance for people who come to talk to city council, and those changes were made at that time. What we have heard from citizens is wanting more clarity on what they can address council on during the public comment period. I've heard in the past as well concerns about the amount of time that we allot for speakers. You know, we see anywhere from 2 minutes to 5 minutes. So when we were reviewing potential changes to this ordinance in 2019, we kind of put it in the middle. 3 it's the average of what we see across the state. So I think this was just a request for the committee and council to just review what we currently have, if there is a need for additional clarity or any additional flexibility or restraint associated with what can be heard at this time. You all recall from the orientation that from MASC that the city is not required to allow public comment in meetings. We're statutorily required to do so during public hearings. So there are communities that frankly don't allow public comment at all. Others that allow it at the beginning and at the end of the meeting. And that's something that has come up in the past, whether the community should have an opportunity to address what council has discussed during a meeting at the end of the meeting. So I think that that's just a point to discuss as well, whether you all think that that would be beneficial. But I think at the end of the day, it's just an opportunity to review whether or not this section deserves or needs any changes, additions, deletions to make it clearer for your constituents when they come to council.
Well, I personally feel it's critical that we allow residents an opportunity to speak to council. I don't really see any issue with our current ordinance. It looks like it was really mimics the city of Charleston's very closely, but I think one confusing item has been whether this addressing council, individual members, and I've heard like, you can't mention their name, but I don't see that in our current ordinance. I see a point here that says that speakers shall address their remarks to the city council as a whole, not to any individual council member. And I think you can still reference a council member, like they could reference my name, but be something that I may have said or done, but be addressing old council as a part of that. I don't see where that would be a violation of our current ordinance. And I think that's something that probably needs to be clarified, because we've taken it beyond what I think this ordinance says at times.
I think it depends, right, on the receiver of a statement, and, you know, maybe a very personal thing where somebody may feel like just being singled out from the group is perceived as an attack. And, you know, the ordinance does address, you know, refraining from harassing or directing threats or personal attacks at council members.
I agree
think
with
that's
that.
very subjective
Yeah.
in a way, and there are some that may not necessarily care that somebody in the podium calls them out directly about a decision or an action or inaction, and others that may prefer that not be the case. I don't know how to write a provision that would prevent that, knowing that it's a very personal.
Yeah, it is. And I do think that item H in here, where harassing, threats, personal attacks, is something that's it should remain in there, is very clear. But I don't know, just by the merely naming a council member's name is a violation of this. That's what that's what I have some problem with.
If it weren't, I mean, I guess back to your comment, it may be more of just a process of, you know, conducting a meeting, that the person who feels attacked may just have to notify
Yeah,
the
it
The
mayor.
could be.
chair.
I take exception to that as
could be.
harassment, and
Yeah.
that potentially could stop it without a code change or without
But
just
I-
as kind of a practice.
But I do think, I think 3 minutes is fine. I think, it's limited to 30 minutes on a meeting unless we approve additional to that. I think that feels about right.
You know, one thing that I do want to bring up is this idea that members of the public can only speak to matters that are on the agenda.
Yeah.
And you can interpret section E that says speakers shall focus and limit their remarks directly to the matter then under discussion. To the matters then under discussion in a meeting are those matters that are listed on an agenda, right?
Yeah.
That's the only thing that council can discuss unless the agenda is amended. I don't recall that was the intention at the
Yeah, I personally
time,
don't care for that.
but I think that there is a challenge to that. You know, there's an opportunity for the public to come and bring up an issue that we may not be aware of. It's
Right.
important to them. It's not on the agenda, and they want to let the
Shine a
city
light on it.
know. So that may be one subsection that could be refined, so that
would
it is
say
not
just take it out.
interpreted.
Yeah, I thought it would be removed.
Just
Yeah.
remove it so
Yeah.
that it cannot be taken to mean that
Right.
people can only address an issue on the agenda.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to limit anybody's ability to get in front of council and raise a concern, whether it's on the agenda or not.
I mean, if you remember when we were talking and debating about the committees and eliminating committees, one of the biggest residents' concerns about doing that was eliminating an opportunity for them to get in front of council to speak. So I think it would be a mistake to limit this in any way, personally.
I'll
Beyond
also
what we
say
have.
this as somebody who's sat through long meetings, just saying, I wish I had one more opportunity to speak. we have to wait until next month. But I mean, I certainly wouldn't want meetings to go any longer than they have to, but I'm kind of intrigued by the idea of allowing a little period of time at the end if somebody wanted to readdress council. The probability of that happening would be slim, I imagine. Nobody's gonna sit through that for another 15 or 30 minutes or whatever, but I wouldn't mind exploring that a little bit. I don't imagine I could get much, maybe, support from everybody else, but it's an interesting order to things, you know, because you're enabled to hear this discussion, and then if you don't feel like it quite got there, or if you wanted to thank people, I don't know. It's an interesting order of business.
Well, going back to that their comments, be related to the agenda, I do think that it might be something to maybe clarify in there. It's just, I think it's important that the people that are speaking and it is related to the agenda, should have the opportunity to at least speak first, so that they're guaranteed at least a better chance to speak, because there is says no longer than 30 minutes, unless additional time is allowed, and then the people that, aren't speaking to something directly on the agenda can speak after those. I mean, I think the city of Charleston kind of has something laid out like that, and I thought that was, made sense.
And I think to that point, I recall during the pandemic when we had a ton of meetings and we had sometimes a lot of citizen comments, it came up, and I just was reminded of that, something you said. At the time, it was explored, or I heard some discussion among some council members about wanting to ensure that residents speak first during the public comment period. So that if we're making changes, this would be an opportunity to do so. Right now, we require everybody to sign up ahead of time, and that would be something that I would ask we add and codify, that folks are required to contact the city clerk ahead of time with their name and address and topic.
Yeah.
So that we can create a list, and that's what Nicole, or city clerk, will call out. So that should be included, but maybe some statement that,
They already do that.
yes,
Okay.
that's our practice. So,
Right.
but it's not codified.
Oh,
It's
okay,
not here, but we
Right.
do it.
gotcha.
The city of Charleston
Yes,
does address
I mean,
the residents speaking first, so that's,
Yeah,
that's not a bad,
Yeah, I agree.
That may be something we could add.
even maybe expand upon it if it's, I mean, I don't know that I've seen council shut it down.
No.
I mean, when there are more people, they generally just keep it going. So, if you had,
And
Seems
the
like
code
they
speaks to that.
Seems like at the city or here? Seems like we did shut it down during the pandemic when we had kind of an overwhelming, we'd have
Yeah.
200 people sign up.
But
I think
it-
we would limit it to 30 during that time, wouldn't we?
But if council, the code allows council to make a motion and vote to extend it. So you, ultimately, the policy setting body has an opportunity to make an exception and vote to that effect. So I would keep it at 30 minutes, knowing that we've done it in the past when council wants to
and
continue.
that's just to say that providing preferential order to residents and/or items on the agenda doesn't negate somebody's ability who doesn't live here or wants to address an item that's not on the agenda from speaking, probably.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah,
It seems like it would only be an issue if you had, so if 3 minutes by 10 people would be 30 minutes. So if you have 10 or less, there's no issue. If you had
Yeah.
more than 10,
right.
seems like we would want to collect information about, are you a resident, is your topic on the agenda,
Applicable, yeah.
and then potentially shuffle them to the top.
Sure.
It would
yeah.
only be an issue when you had a ton of people signing up.
Right.
I'd also, and I don't know, I've only been to one meeting, and I don't think, it's also would be interesting, I think, for all of council to have an idea of who's, what the order is and who's coming up. I mean, that's probably not anything that needs to be codified, but it'd be, if we all knew, okay, well, there are 14 people, and
We typically, the city clerk will typically share that right before the meeting with me and the mayor, just so that he knows how many people are signed up. But there's no, we could share that with the entire council.
yeah.
she'll keep a list. And if we require, if we give priority to those, to residents and priority to those that are gonna speak on a matter that's listed on the agenda, then that list would be built that way, based
Sure.
on that criteria, and then share with everybody on council.
Yeah.
And we require people to sign up by 3 PM the day prior to the meeting.
Yeah.
So there would be plenty of time for us to distribute that.
I'm also of the opinion that, like the city of Charleston states, speakers residing in and/or maintaining a business license within the city. I think that also should qualify that they, jump
Have
the list,
priority.
essentially. As well as also pertaining to the agenda and just, go in that order. But I think that, they shouldn't be slighted.
So basically, we think it's not terrible, but it could be fine-tuned a little bit, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, so my list, based on our conversation, is to remove section E, to ensure that folks have the ability to address council on any issue, whether it's on the agenda or not. We would offer preferential order to residents and those who hold a business license with the city. Add a requirement that folks need to sign up ahead of the meeting, which is mirroring our practice currently. And just logistically, you all would like to know ahead of time who is signed up to speak ahead of a meeting. But that wouldn't necessarily be codified.
Right.
And we're good with 3 minutes? 3 minutes seems like not long at all when you're talking, and a long time when you're listening.
Yeah.
I don't know what,
Does
it's
seem
like
to
riding
cut
behind a
people
golf cart.
So did you
Fabulous
get
when you're on it, but it's terrible when you're driving
preferential
behind it.
If it's an issue on the agenda?
Oh, okay. No, I did not
So
get that.
3 matters would get preferential order. Resident, business license, and speaking on an item on the agenda.
Yeah, okay.
And then last thing, sorry, speakers residing in the city, does that mean they would have to be a full-time resident? Or would you just
It's
have to
illegal.
own property?
I think a legal residence, right?
I mean, I think
It's generally, well, I took that to mean
But do we want
4%, but
to-
I'm not sure. I mean,
Yeah,
we're a
but do we
little,
want to exclude, just
A
because they're a
6%.
6% owner that lives here 8 months out of the year instead
Well,
of,
Well, I don't think we
only-
exclude anybody right now.
well,
and
not,
that's what the-
I don't mean exclude, but,
Anybody can come and speak.
It would only be if you you have more than 10 people, you've met your limit, you've met your
Right.
30-minute limit.
Yeah.
And then if you're doing that decision of cutting a group out, that's the only time it would ever come to pass. Generally, anybody would be
not
able
an
to
issue.
speak.
Yeah.
Would it be an issue to say residents or property owners?
I don't know if we're trying to solve a problem that's not there. I mean, we've never really had a problem. We let everybody speak that comes. And if we have more than 10, I don't know of a time, at least while I've been on here, where council hasn't said, yeah, then we'll extend the period of time to let everybody talk. But I don't know if we're
Yeah.
overcomplicating it, complicating it with trying to figure out who lives where, who does what. But
I agree with that. I just think, what's the harm in saying property owners? Because, someone from Mount Pleasant comes over and, I don't know, you're kind of putting a Mount Pleasant resident on the same level as just a part-time resident on Isle of Palms, and that, how that might make them feel. I'm just speculating. But, I don't see any harm in just saying, residing in, maintaining a business license, or owning property on Isle of Palms. That's just my thoughts.
I do feel like in some of the more contentious meetings that we've had, whether it was the PRD or, the short-term rental ordinances and rolling up on the beach stuff, I have heard from people, and I've been one of them really, that have felt like, you wanted to make sure you got signed up because you didn't want to not have time in the face of, perhaps a corporate representative from somewhere or an off-island property owner with an interest that might not align with yours. I don't have any problem really starting with speakers residing in this municipality and then going down from there. And to me, residing in means, you know, this is your permanent residence. And then you open it up to people who conduct business here 365 days a year, and then you know, bring in, I mean, and, you know, even within the, I think for this particular community, when you bring in immediately a business license holder, you are opening it up to a lot of second homeowners, because, I mean, that's, gosh, what is that of our,
Yeah.
it's 40% of our housing stock right now are those people, so, and that puts them right in the top group, which, you know, I think are really the people that are impacted by the decisions that we make. But not, you know, I certainly wouldn't want to exclude anybody from Mount Pleasant that had an opinion about the beach either, so, but it's just more of a pecking order than an
Yeah, it's just
elimination, yeah.
an order, and I just, you know, don't see any reason not to, I guess, prioritize people who own or have a business license, own property or have a business license here. Just don't see any reason not to put them, you know.
So, I mean, we could say preferential order to residents, they go first, then maybe property, you know, property owners, you know, that could apply to a second home owner, just spends half of the year here, but may not rent their property,
Right.
don't have a business license, and maybe they have priority over somebody that just holds a business license that may or may not, you know, have any other interest other than holding a business license.
I don't know, I mean, I think about, the gentleman that used to own Coconut Joe's, he was very active. He had a lot of citizens' comments that he made, but he lived in Somerville, but, you know, he had a business here. But, you know, I think, I mean, I don't, you know, again, to John's point 10 minutes ago, I think we're kind of splitting hairs here.
So just leave it as for preferential order for residents and those who hold a business license. And when the issue to be addressed is on the agenda, or do you all want to add property owners
Yeah,
to
I
that
think- I
list?
think we had property owners.
We added,
Yeah.
okay.
I don't know how rigid Nicole is on the 3 PM the day before.
She
And
is.
She's very, so we're already telling, if they call her that morning and they think it's an emergency, that we just don't let them talk.
I think what's communicated back to the folks is the deadline to sign up is at
It's
3
gone, it's
o'clock, yeah.
passed. Okay.
I think that there have been situations where folks have said, oh, I did not know, and she will add them to the agenda. I mean, I think we are on the side of being accessible and
Yeah.
able, but as much as we can, want to be consistent, kind of treat everybody the same way, and,
I wonder if
but it
it's
doesn't happen,
codified.
it doesn't
If that
happen,
I mean, if it's codified that you have to be, if people would,
yeah. Well, we've been doing this for, I think, the last 2 years, so, and it's worked out well. I say we keep it. All right, well, do you all want us we'll make these changes on a red line, bring it to the workshop as a recommendation from the committee? Or do you all want to see it, discuss it one more time before bringing it before council?
I think we should just look at it at our next meeting again,
In March.
before we take it.
Look at it in
to-
March,
yeah, till
okay.
we take it to workshop.
Okay,
It'll delay it a little bit, but I don't
Yeah,
think
but
anybody's itching.
it's not a
You know, It's
crisis.
not, yeah, nobody's
Not
waiting
urgent.
on us in this
Yeah.
very critical decision here for the city. So, okay, so moving on, under new business, 4B, discussion of city code section 5-4-138D, which regulates placement of political signs in the public rights of way. I've already been getting calls about this. You
so
wanna-
this is something that we briefly discussed at our last meeting for the committee to review and evaluate. It was a request of the mayor and another council member to look at our current regulation. How do they compare? I think at our last election, we received a lot of complaints about the number of signs and sign pollution and just the aesthetics of looking at all those signs along the public right of way. So I've shared with you all just a quick research that we performed looking at other codes around the area. And I was surprised to see that we're one of the few communities that do allow the placement of political and campaign signs in the public right of way. Across the board, we saw consistently communities prohibiting any signs, temporary signs along the public right of way. They have to be placed in private property, including political and campaign signs. The exception was the town of Sullivan's Island. They allow the placement of campaign signs along the right of way 2 weeks prior to the event, an election. And they have to be removed, I think within 4 or 5 days. Our current code allows those signs to be placed along the public right of way 30 days before an election. So we just facilitated those examples from other communities for you all to look at and discuss whether this is something you all want to pursue, recommend that we make any changes, whether to reduce the timing that they're allowed in the public right of way, or completely, limit that to only be placed during a certain time frame on private property.
So when the town of Sullivan says located not less than 10 feet out of the street right-of-way line, is that not in somebody's private, or what's that mean? Am
Should
I not
be.
thinking about that correctly?
No, street right-of-way would be,
So is that pushing it 10 feet out of the right-of-way into somebody's yard?
Well, then that is
Yeah.
private property.
I think so.
The way I read it was not.
unless it's
I
10
can-
feet the other way.
Well,
Is
yeah,
it
I
10
can get
feet
turned
into
around
the-
on that, I'm not sure. I feel like as I'm driving through, anybody think about as they're driving to Sullivan's, I don't
So-
think they're real close to the street, do you?
No, I think,
Out
it
of
reads
the
that you are not allowed to have public right-of-way
Yeah,
signs
think,
in the
yeah,
public right of way.
that's right. So we are the only one.
Okay. Well, that should make it easy, but I've gotten calls in support of this effort, and I don't know, and really, over the years in various elections, it's 30 days ahead of time, everybody just takes a big deep breath and says, here we go again, here comes the litter on the stick. And then, this community is excellent at removing things immediately after. I mean,
Yes.
there's not a lot of lingering going on, but it is a bit much. And, I would support a change to this code. It's interesting that ahead of this section of the code, the temporary sign, we have a prohibition against any signs in the rights of way unless, otherwise approved by city council. And then we go along 3 sections later and we allow this activity. So, I think it's good to be consistent and to keep things out of the right of way. I'm okay with 30 days, I think, but the 2 weeks intrigues me too. But at that point, you think,
I guess my question is, I'm curious to know what the reason is to not allow them in the right way. Like, why do these other municipalities not allow them?
It's just clutter, right?
I think it's
Visual clutter.
aesthetics, just visual pollution. It was interesting. I was looking at the town of Mount Pleasant's findings of fact, and they always talk about the resources it takes for the town staff to collect the ones that are illegal, and whether or not they're in private property or the right of way, are they allowed or not allowed. So I think that just having a blanket prohibition makes it easier for the people who are enforcing it. Just say it's not allowed.
Do we have a lot of trouble with that?
I will say, and Elizabeth, you made the comment about how quickly it gets cleaned up. Generally, local elections, council members, it does get picked up quickly, but if it's not gone by 2 days, our staff does go and get it. So it doesn't linger out there, but a big part of it is our staff. But it is more on the national level elections that those are not residents. They kind of come out, canvass the entire community, and then they don't come back as responsibly as the candidates for council. So that it is a chore, but it's probably, a day. It's probably one person dedicating the better part of a day.
So I think, that plus this concern about creating litter, if they, fly away and then, you're just polluting the area. I think we've heard concerns about just how it looks.
Is there a way or even possible to, I don't know, allow local candidates to post signs but not, national and state candidates? I mean, or you can't distinguish.
I will say there is a lot of legislation and case law on freedom of speech with signs. And I think that a prior city attorney has kind of talked about limiting content at all, and that it could be problematic. Not an attorney, obviously, but my suspicion would be that it would be very challenging to do it that way.
Yeah,
It'd be regulating content at that point.
yeah.
I'd also think it'd be difficult to manage a limit on the number of signs that any candidate could put up. I think that'd be very difficult
Yeah.
to try to manage. One thing that I think that would need, if we continue to allow any kind of signs, I think it needs to be on the sign whose sign it is, who paid for it, in other words. Like, on the referendum this last time, there were signs all over, you didn't know who were putting them up. Because they didn't say, paid by this or, provided by whoever the entity was that were putting them up. But I do think there's I'm a little bit conflicted, but I do think there's a case to eliminate them altogether out of the right-of-ways and just allow them in yards, in private property.
And I think by doing that, what you've done maybe too is curb the sort of outside interests, because if you can't just come in and plunk stuff down in a right of way one night and wake up the next morning and there are a bunch of signs that nobody knows where they came from, if they're in people's yards, you've got somebody to ask.
Yeah.
And generally you have somebody that's in support of a position or another, or a candidate or another, and it's pretty clear.
It would weirdly, I hadn't really thought about this, but to that point, key pieces of physical property become key. I mean, if you happen to own a corner parcel, that now has become, obviously, you've kind of become the gatekeeper of signage at a key visible location, which would be a different landscape for us. I mean, it's kind of been a free-for-all for whatever benefit that is. Obviously has the downside of being a free-for-all and signs everywhere, but you have the benefit of not kind of making key property holders the gatekeeper of visible signage.
Well, it would be if they chose to put anything. We might end up with no signs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting,
Yeah, I mean, you could be opening up another problem where they put 30 signs in their yard because they can. Could be looking at, but I mean,
They could do that today.
yeah.
right, true. But if, excluded from putting signs in the right of way, they might just
Prefer
overreact,
them
and
in the right of
whereas
way,
right
yeah.
now they don't have to do that or feel like they need to. But I'll just speak and share a friend of mine's experience when she ran for council and was very limited in putting out signs and when she could do it and that sort of thing. And she was, well known in the community and still found it difficult to, get the word out, share her message, let people know. And I think when we're asking people to volunteer their personal time and open themselves up to public criticism and scrutiny and all the things that go with that they should be allowed every opportunity to, get their message out there or let people know that they're running. People, can reach out to them. I guess I don't really see I do see both sides because I understand that this last election, I agree, the signs were insane. But that is not a typical election in my memory where we have a referendum like that, a lot of extra groups, special interest or not, putting out their additional signs as well, which I thought most were were labeled with, who put out the signs, with the exception of a few, but, you know, just allowing them to get their message out. I mean, she expressed to me that it was frustrating, and that even, you know, close to the election, she had people come up and say, "Oh, I had no idea you were running, but I just happened to see your sign the other day." Like, you know, and it was just a challenging, when it already is a challenging process, and we're gonna, I don't know, potentially present another challenge to it.
I'm confused though, actually, whoever this person is you're talking about, they had the opportunity to put signs out though, right?
No,
'Cause they
she
weren't
did.
limited.
Well, she,
We didn't limit
it
that.
was Sullivan, so 2 weeks
Oh,
prior
Sullivan's
to,
Island, okay. Yeah.
the election, but only in
People's yards.
In
people's yards.
People's Yard, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, she's, as a longtime resident there, she felt it was very unfair. And I just thought I would share her perspective on that, because, you know, it was a unique one, and she, and I totally understand that, you know, things gotta get out of hand, but I don't really expect that to be the case. And we can certainly revisit in the future if it continues to be the case, but, you know, 30 days doesn't seem like, you know, too much of a burden for residents to.
Especially if you're gonna spend the money on them for, you know, you think,
That's
gosh,
true, you're
I've
spending a
spent.
lot of money
Yeah,
on
they're not
signs, and
cheap.
you only get to look at them for,
Yeah.
you know, 2 weeks or only in people's yards, you know. And this is just my personal, I don't know if y'all felt this way or not, but, you know, my first time running and putting my sign out there, and then, like, you know, every time you leave your house or come over the connector, you know, you see your signs on. It's like a sense of pride. You kind of take that away from somebody who's running. Again, they're volunteering their time. I think that, you know, it's a small price to pay for residents. And I completely 100% agree that signs should be picked up within a day, 2 days max. You know, I think it's what we have in there, but I think most of us do pretty well at picking up the signs.
I'll say that a lot of, I went and read as opposed to just this blurb, I looked at the entirety of their sign ordinances within these municipalities, and all of them at the beginning speak about, you know, not only the aesthetics of it and this interest in keeping kind of a cleaner, more streamlined rights of ways and communities, but also they referenced public safety concerns, which our signs are not, you know, political signs are not that tall, but, you know, this is also an overall sign ordinance, and there is a public interest in keeping all signs, permanent, temporary, whatever, out of rights of way that we don't own or, you know, at times maintain. And so, you know, once you realize that the ordinance itself is there in whole for temporary, permanent, all signs not to be within rights of way, and then you start carving back out any time that you can actually do that, the whole thing kind of starts, you know, you start falling apart, like, well, what, you know, why can we have this type of sign and not that type of sign? And why is this 30 days and why can't I have one for a week? And, you know, it all kind of, once you start peeling back the layers of the onion, and I can't speak for these other councils or municipalities or how they got to this decision, but it seems more in keeping with the intent of the entirety of the ordinance, not to have a point where you start carving out different types of signs that can go in the right of way, because then you've created exceptions and there's just this waterfall kind of event.
Yeah, and I don't think it's any kind of, you know, all candidates are treated the same way under this, so you don't have any kind of unfair advantage going on. I mean, I'm personally kind of torn on it right now, though, and I would like some time to talk to some in the community on it and not kind of come to any decision today on is where I am with it. We don't have any
We're just
campaigns
up for
coming up.
discussion now.
Yeah.
They're up right now, John.
Yeah, we have
We
we have the Democratic primary is this Saturday, the 3rd, and the Republican primary is on the 24th, so
But we're already within that.
we're already
timeframe.
within
It's
that.
not
Any
like we're-
changes would,
Yeah.
would go into effect for the general election coming up
November.
at the end of this year,
Yeah.
November.
Just to speak to, one potential unfair advantage, if you're only allowing signs in private property, is, someone who maybe just moved here or doesn't know a lot of people in the community yet, it's difficult for them to, get their signs in people's yards. You literally gotta go bust your butt to knock on doors and make phone calls, and, that can present a significant challenge or unfair bias to someone who has been here forever and everybody loves them and they don't even care what their policies or thoughts are. They just like them, so they put their sign in their yard. That happens too, and that's not going to stop happening. But that might present the unfair advantage to someone, when you can only put signs in a private yard as opposed.
We also have half of the island that doesn't allow them anyway,
Yeah, it's true.
which is, there's a reason for that.
We can keep this on the
Yeah.
agenda
Yeah,
for more
yeah, for
discussion.
sure, yeah, and I do hope, to anybody out there watching, that if you, not that anybody is, but if you had opinions about public participation,
well,
if you have opinions about signs in the rights of way, educate yourself and make some citizens' comments, please. We're here. We'll be here next March.
Sign out before 3 p.m.
There you go. Just sign up before 3 p.m. Yeah, the day before.
The day before.
Yeah. So, all right. So that's it for that. But moving on to miscellaneous business. I guess we don't have any other than the next meeting, setting the next meeting. And we were going to talk about we had mentioned the capital plan, but that's just moving to the workshop. So,
Yes.
okay. No executive session necessary. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned.
Okay.
Second.
All right. We got a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor?